Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. Today, we're talking a little Lonzo Ball. Sounds like the Pelicans might be ready to let him fly on his own. Could be leaving the nest and heading somewhere else here in free agency, even though he is restricted. We're going to talk all about it. Where could he land? There's a few teams that have already been put out there. Keith, Lonzo doesn't seem like he's going to be a Pelican much longer, does it?
No, it doesn't. I think that's one of those situations where when that trade was made, as he was part of the Anthony Davis package, he didn't really want to go there, but he went. He didn't raise a huge stink about it. Didn't act like a jerk like we unfortunately see some guys do. He went there, and then it just didn't really work out. He was a weird fit next to Drew Holiday. Didn't look good. Looked better than it did when he was next to Eric Bledsoe, as it was this year. And I think now we're just in a position where the Pelicans don't want to tie up their cap sheet long term with putting money into Lonzo Ball. If he doesn't really want to be there, let's go. So that doesn't mean he's not a good player. I think, I've done more of a 180 on Lonzo than I ever thought I would, because he's now shown he can shoot it a little bit better than we thought.
Yeah,
I'm a little worried
from deep.
yeah, I'm a little worried he's got a little Rondo in him where he doesn't like to drive very much anymore because he doesn't want to go to the free throw line. So that's a little concerning. But you put the right guys around him, he's pretty good. I think you want him on a team where he can share the ball handling and playmaking as opposed to just doing it all himself, because then I think it gets a little messy. But yeah, there's a lot of teams like that. Like one of the teams that's been prominently mentioned is Chicago Bulls, which would have to be a sign and trade unless the Bulls really clear the decks and move on from a whole bunch of guys. They could get to cap space. Maybe that is something that happens and they sign them outright. And Ball, Levine, and Vooch, pretty good passing, pretty good shooting, good ball movement. You build something pretty credible there. But the one I'm really kind of came out of nowhere and wasn't expecting, and I was looking behind you there, I don't see it. You're gonna dig out a Lonzo Ball jersey or what?
I almost went. It was a while ago. Lonzo Ball, obviously, they went on. They went on major discount, right? And so I almost grabbed one at the time. But look, Lonzo back to the Lakers. That's out there. Mark Stein put that one out there. Shams Charania mentioned the Bulls, mentioned the Clippers as a potential landing spot for him as well. There's going to be teams that are after him. And Shams also mentioned that, look, the Pelicans are probably not going to match an offer sheet. Now, the challenge is, like you said, all of these teams need the cooperation of the Pelicans in order to get it done. Mostly, I know the Bulls maybe can get it done, but most of these teams are probably going to need the cooperation of the Pelicans in a sign and trade in order to make a Lonzo Ball move happen. So the first hurdle that has to be cleared is, where does Lonzo want to go, right? Like, that's going to determine a lot of this. He has to decide which team he wants to go to, and then from there, that team can negotiate with the Pelicans and figure out how to work out a sign and trade in order to get this done. That is, unless, a team comes along, maybe the Knicks come along and say, hey, Lonzo, here's $25 million. And he says, okay, right? Like, there's some teams out there with cap space that could obviously change this. But from the teams we've heard right now, it sounds like the Pelicans won't be leaving this empty handed. They'll get something in a sign and trade.
Yeah, I've been getting asked regularly what the value is in first year salary for Lonzo. And I keep saying 17 to 20 million feels probably about right. Maybe a team could get him a little lower. Maybe you could get him at 15. I don't think so. My guess is, anything lower than 15 and the Pelicans should just match it, because then that's, that now you're just playing, you're just being smart with an asset there of you could always trade him later or put him with Bledsoe or Adams and go get a $30 million player if you wanted to or something. But it gets up higher than that, that's where it starts to be, all right, now we're in a realm where it might be, this could get kind of ugly. So I keep saying 17 to 20 million. So the good thing is, if it's the Lakers or the Clippers, teams that are well over the cap and are going to be well over the cap, that's not so high that it's one of these. It's not like Damian Lillard, where we talked about the struggle for putting together a trade for Dame. What it does do for you is it puts you into a position where that's an easier number to trade for. Like, let's use the Lakers as an example. That is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Kyle Kuzma and something else, and you're basically there. Right, you're there. And now your challenge is it's a sign and trade. We all know what happens with the hard cap, right? And that becomes
Yes.
a hurdle you got to work around. But you're not so far over because you're probably not re-signing Schroeder in that case. Or if you do, you could play hardball with him a little bit more and, those kind of things. It starts to become just the math starts to be a little bit different.
Actually, Keith, you know what? We've had a lot of people in our comment section. See, we do read the comments lately that have been asking us to go a little bit more in depth into some of the terms and everything. So let's not even assume that everyone knows exactly how the hard cap works. So
Perfect.
let's jump into that
Let's
a little
do it.
bit.
All right.
So let's
and
say
so I'm going to
that,
use the Lakers as an
yes,
example.
let's use them.
Because we're there, right? So what the hard cap is basically what they did a few CBAs ago is the NBA said we can't have these teams that are spending an insane amount of money with no repercussions. So basically what they did was they said we don't want the tax line to be the barrier, so everybody gets a little bit more. So next year it projects to be about $6.5 million above the tax line. Taxes projected about 136.6 million. This is 143 million. Almost 143.1. So call it $6.5 million above. So what happens is that's called the tax apron. So you'll hear me regularly refer to the apron and the hard cap interchangeably because that's all that really matters there. So what happens is, so let's say you're the Golden State Warriors, where you blew so far past that you couldn't even see it anymore.
Right.
What happens with them is they cannot acquire a player via sign and trade. They cannot use the biannual exception because it goes away because they were over the tax apron, and they get the smaller mid-level exception. So it drops from, for next year, about 9.5 million. It drops down to about 5.9 million. So that's where it is. So it's called the taxpayer mid-level, but it really changes when you cross the apron or not. That's when that number changes. Now, if you're everybody else, so again, we're using the Lakers as the example here.
Yes.
So how you become hard capped. So the Lakers are not, let's be clear about this, because I think everybody probably knows they were hard capped last year, even if you don't fully understand that. That ends when the league year changes over. No one starts out a year hard capped. So what triggers the hard cap is you use the biannual exception. Lakers can't do that because they used it last year on Wesley Matthews. Right. That's something you can only use every other year. You use a portion of the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, that 9.5 million, that is greater than or equal to the taxpayer mid-level. Because again, what they're trying to do is make sure you're not double dipping, right? You can't go way over that and then exceed the hard cap later. Doesn't work that way. So it triggers the hard cap. Or you acquire a player via sign and trade. It doesn't matter if you trade somebody away via sign and trade. That doesn't matter. It's acquiring a player via sign and trade.
People thinking Dennis Schroeder in their heads. Look, if the Lakers were to sign and trade Dennis Schroeder, that does not create a hard cap for them.
Exactly. Yep. So that's what hard caps you. When you are hard capped, as Trevor knows quite well, you can't exceed that hard cap by even $1. It doesn't matter if you're down players. Figure it out. Waive a guy, waive and stretch a guy, do whatever you got to do, but you got to get under that hard cap. And there's not a point where it is, well, we'll figure that out later. Like the luxury tax can be figured out later. The hard cap cannot. You can't exceed it and then figure it out later. You can't even go over. The trade would be declined by the NBA. Transaction would be declined by the NBA. Whatever it is, because it's not legal. So that's how you get hard capped, is through those manners. So the hard cap line's about 143 million. So now let's take it to the Lakers right now. Lakers guaranteed salaries on the book is about 116 million in guaranteed salary on their books, plus roster holds and all these other things that gets a little complicated. But that's players, the draft pick, and then some roster holds. So you're working with 116 million. So you're about 27 million under the hard cap or so, right in that range. So if you bring in Lonzo Ball, let's say they're just going to use round numbers, 20 million, but you trade out Kentavious Caldwell Pope and Marc Gasol and Alfonso McKinney. Right. That's your salary match to go out there, and you're basically sending out about as much as you're bringing back. You're still sitting in the same spot, so you're sitting in a really good spot because you're right there. It gets hard when you start bringing guys in and you start sending out less than you bring in. When there's that imbalance, that starts to create that tightness up against the hard cap where you'd find a little bit of trouble. And that's where if you're thinking, well, you know what, we'll sign and trade for Lonzo using these guys. Then we'll sign and trade Schroeder to bring in somebody at 25 million or something like that. That's where it starts to get a little complicated and you're starting to get a little close. Because the other thing you got to remember, you start doing a 2 or 3 for 1 trade, you got to fill those roster spots eventually anyway. And again, I just to hammer it home. If you're a hard cap, doesn't matter if it's a veteran minimum, doesn't matter if it's a rookie minimum, you can't go over the hard cap under any circumstances. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as you think all these things through of, yeah, it looks like there's all this great flexibility. And the other thing I will say is a lot of people keep just randomly throwing Montrezl Harrell's $9.7 million in there. Yeah, if he picks it up. But if he's like, I'm picking it up and getting traded somewhere I don't want to be, I ain't picking it up.
Right.
See you later. I'm going free agency.
And you won't know. He doesn't have to decide until 2 days after the draft. So it's not like draft night. So that's you're going to know when you're trading those. Yeah, you're potentially trading that pick.
Exactly. Yeah, it gets super messy with trying to do something where you're a guy who has an option and you're going to do a sign and trade after the draft and include a draft pick because just the guy can screw it all up. If Harrell gets wind of it, he's like, nah, I'm out. Yep. See you later. I'm going to go sign with Charlotte direct. I'm not dealing with your nonsense. So, yeah, so that's just where, impossible? No, not at all. Not even close to impossible. It's salary cap gymnastics, and in the end, it all comes down to math.
It's something to work around. So, practically speaking, let's say the Lakers go the Lonzo route. They trigger that hard cap, right? And they're still sitting let's say they're right around 116 million with Lonzo brought in. Well, then you go and you re-sign Alex Caruso. Then you go and you re-sign Talen Horton-Tucker. And let's say they both get, 10 each, right? And then next thing you know, you're at about $136 million in salary. You still have a bunch of roster spots to fill. You're probably not going to bring back Dennis Schroeder at that point or anything, but let's say, you bring back Markieff Morris, you start bringing back a couple other players. And next thing you know, you've got a couple roster spots to fill and you're sitting at 141 million and you need to use the veteran minimum. Well, you can't anymore, right? And that's exactly what happened to the Lakers last season. Why they carried 14 players for a good chunk of the season was because of that hard cap, because they could not use even the veteran minimum. Flip it, though. Don't bring in Lonzo. Bring back Schroeder. Don't use more than the taxpayer mid-level exception. And now you can continue going. Let's say you pay Taylor. Let's say you pay Talen Horton-Tucker $15 million. You pay Caruso $15 million. Next thing you know, you're sitting at like, $148 million and you still have some roster spots to fill. Hey, veteran minimum contracts. Here you go. Pass them out like Oprah. No big deal. It's a soft cap under that scenario. Yep. So that is the difference for the Lakers. And that's not an argument one way or another. That's just the reality of their situation right now if they were to try something with Lonzo Ball.
That's how you get the Golden State Warriors with a total salary bill of $169 million, which is $31 million over the hard cap because they're not hard cap. So it doesn't matter. They can keep spending and trading and doing all the things they want to do. But like next year, right now, today, they're sitting about $24 million over that hard cap. They are going to be in a position where they can't do a sign and trade. They only have the taxpayer mid-level exception, and they don't have the biannual exception to use. So those are your kind of punishments for starting out there. And then if you do any of those things, it eliminates that loophole. The NBA does a pretty good job of closing down loopholes in the CBA because what they don't want to have you do is you dip under, hey, we're going to use the full mid-level, now we're over, but we already used it. Too bad. Doesn't work that way. You're going to get hard capped and get stuck. That's where Boston gets stuck with the whole trade exception. They traded for signed Tristan Thompson using the full mid-level, which left them only a little bit of wiggle room under the hard cap. And then that's why they couldn't use the full $28 million of the Gordon Hayward trade exception without sending a bunch of salary out. And it gets complicated, but just know we've got you here. Ask if you're confused. We'll get to it. It might take us a video or two, but we'll get to it. And I do want to add, a lot of people have been asking for some explainers and those kind of things. We promise when we get into slower news days, we'll get into some of that stuff. Or as situations arise, we'll take the time, take an extra few minutes and really break it down why things happen in a certain way.
Right. And that's stuff that hopefully people will be able to go back and reference, a year from now or whatever. They can go back and look and see, okay, this is why this has to happen this way or whatever. But so for these teams right now, it's the Chicago Bulls, the Clippers, the Lakers, all three of them have to look at we'd be triggering a hard cap if we bring in Lonzo Ball. So that has to be part of the decision-making process. Not only do we want Lonzo Ball as a player, which a good player, improved his three-point percentage, improved his free throw percentage, 78% from the line last season. Doesn't mean he was getting a lot of free throw attempts, but did improve his percentage last season. So there's a lot to like there as a player. But you have to factor in, it's not just what does he want in terms of a contract? What are we going to have to give up in order to get him? It's also we're going to have to operate under the constriction of a hard cap. And again, that's the Clippers, that's the Lakers, that's the Bulls. Any of these teams right now that's rumored to trade for him would have to deal with that situation.
Yeah, and with the Clippers, just without going super deep into detail, it's very hard for them to figure out how to make that work because as it stands right now, we know Kawhi's probably going to opt out. We're just in order things. I'll spoil it a little, but we already talked about Kawhi partially torn ACL. But let's assume he's just going to re-sign for the max with the Clippers, or even opts in and then does a renegotiation or whatever he does, and opt in and extend. However he does it, he's going to get his money. Let's just say it's with the Clippers. They're already operating over it, so they wouldn't even be able to do that. Again, because if you're already over the hard cap, you can't even do a sign and trade. So they'd have to clear some stuff under. And there's ways you can do that because you can arrange trades that don't happen exactly at the same time. And that can literally be, we did this trade and then we did this trade. It can be a matter of seconds. But it's just, there's ways they can work around it. But they've got some constraints that they'd have to work around to even get in a position. Whereas like the Lakers and the Bulls, that's probably more of a after the fact thing that they have to deal with versus they could make it happen on the front end. It's just where does that leave you flexibility on the back end? Right. Then I guess you got a question, why do the Pelicans help out two other teams in their division, especially a team, that they own their draft picks coming forward? That's the other part where it gets a little messy for me there is if I'm the Pelicans, why? And I do Spotify Green Room, as you know. Somebody said, well, why wouldn't they just do a double sign and trade and take back Dennis Schroeder? I was like, well why? Well, Ball and Bledsoe weren't good. Why would you want Schroeder?
If they wanted him, sure, but I don't know that they would. Like they already have Eric Bledsoe. They've got Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Like you've got some guys.
Here, Lewis, the rookie guard. Sure. Yeah. If they lose Lonzo, they're going with the young guards. They might add a veteran just to have him in the mix, but it's not going to be a Dennis Schroeder. It'll be a much further. It'll be an Ish Smith type of guy who comes in for 20 minutes a night as a backup behind the kids, and that's what he gives you. So, yeah, it's not going to be a major free agent.
Right. So this gets – I mean, I know we think like, hey, he's a free agent, just sign him. It's actually pretty complicated because, first hurdle, where does Lonzo want to go? From there, can the Pelicans work something out with that team? Do they want to work something out with that team in order to get Lonzo to that destination? And then from there, maybe you can get it done. But when you've got all those moving parts – all it takes is one little slip up and the whole thing crumbles. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all works out.
What they should do is trade Lonzo, Brandon Ingram, and Josh Hart for Anthony Davis.
Well, yeah.
I think that would be a pretty good
You also have to throw in just a few picks there. But yeah, maybe that'll be enough to get it done.
Yeah, maybe. No, that's not real. Don't yell at us in the comments. That was a
joke. All right, guys. Well, look, I think it's going to be a really interesting offseason, particularly for the point guard position. Lonzo Ball seems to be on the upswing career-wise. Has a number of teams that do want him. Appears the Pelicans are not among them, at least not at what we think his asking price is going to be. So it means there's probably going to be yet another trade, which fits into our theme that this is going to be the summer of the trade for the NBA. Can't wait to see how this all breaks down. But let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think that there's a particular team should make this work for Lonzo Ball? Is it worth it, knowing that you're going to have to trigger the hard cap if we're assuming that it's the Bulls, the Lakers, or the Clippers that winds up working out a deal for him? And again, we still have a little bit of time. I'm sure some other teams will emerge as suitors as well. Till next time, everybody. See ya. Stay safe. And don't forget to subscribe